Okay. Hi, thanks for folks joining us. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for folks to wander in, so probably still have time to grab a glass of water or finish that last email or something. And we'll probably get started just a couple of minutes after 11:30, just in case anyone needs a little, what do they say, a little extra time getting down the jetway, a little extra time logging into the webinar. And I should probably also mute myself for the moment. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Okay. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to let folks roll in. I see we've got some people on the phone. And thanks to everyone for joining us. As I probably mentioned, hopefully mentioned, we're recording this, so we will send out a link afterwards that you can share with colleagues who wanted to join but couldn't. And I'll be taking some notes also if there are questions that we don't get to, can't answer, I will try to get answers to those. If you have friends or colleagues who work at synagogues, we're doing a parallel webinar for synagogues on Tuesday, featuring speakers from Park Avenue Synagogue and Congregation B'nai Jeshurun, which is going to be great too. That's also recorded. And we'll see where we go. My name is Martin Kaminer. It says Jewish Women's Foundation of New York at the bottom of my screen because our project, B'Kavod, is based there. They're kind enough to let us use their Zoom license and other things as well. We run a variety of programs related to making sure all Jewish organizations nationally are places of safety and respect. We have one of our trainers here today, Laura, who will speak to you in a little bit. We have and continue to do trainings for all types of Jewish organizations, not only schools, but synagogues, agencies, camps of all sorts here in New York. And nationally, we have trainers in cities across the country. And we have some other parallel initiatives. We operate an info line, a type of a helpline, and a couple of other services like that. Here in New York, we are, I'm told, ahead of all of the other 49 states in terms of ambitious new legislation, complicated legislation, much of which is already in effect. Some is coming into effect, which has heightened people's awareness around this. But for us, we started before. We're coming up on our second year of operations, and we feel that this is universal, something of universal importance. And although the new legislation has put it on people's radar screens, it's something that we feel is important for everyone to consider. So why don't I do this? Let me welcome everyone now that you're here. You can see our two presenters, our two heads of school, Amanda and Ben. I was going to say in your upper left, but they might be somewhere else. We're going to hear from Amanda. She'll share remarks about her experience at Loria in Brooklyn. And then we'll hear from Ben about his experience at Schechter. You're all heads of school or educational administrators, folks in different roles. So this is really intended as a informal discussion between practitioners. Laura, who was the trainer for Schechter, will share some of her experiences and some other information about this training in particular. And then we will work assiduously to save at least the last 20 minutes for your questions and really for an informal discussion of what this might mean for your institution, what other questions you might have. So with that, let me turn it over to Amanda.
Okay, hi everyone. I am going to tell you a little bit about sort of how we ended up doing this and what the experience was like for our team. I think that we were looking for someone to come in and do training who both could help us sort of from a legal perspective of making sure we needed to do what we needed to do from an HR perspective. And I think also someone who would understand deeply the experience of community in the Jewish day school. Our teachers teach in teams, so there's 4 teachers in each classroom and they work collaboratively. And we just in general are a very collaborative, team-oriented environment. And so in our approach to who are the right teammates to come in and do this, you know, the options were sort of a little bit more corporate or something else that felt like it could work, but wouldn't give us the same, wouldn't have the same lens or the same frame of like deeply understanding what's the conversation here, you know, in a day school. And And we wanted it to really connect for our staff. We didn't want it to feel like something that, okay, I'm going through the rules, check off the boxes, we did this training and you're done, but actually could help them really understand taking these concepts of what it means to be in a respectful workplace and creating a respectful culture. And so that's how we ended up doing this work. And we did it in August at the end of the summer during our faculty training time. And we did separate training. So we had one training for our faculty and staff, and then one training for our administrators, of which I was a part, and the administration, none of the administration were in the faculty staff one. That was totally confidential. So I actually don't even know what happened there. I'm assuming it went well. Everybody was happy and healthy at the end of it. So those were at two separate times. And then the third component, the board component, is actually something that we haven't completed yet, but are planning to. The experience, I think for my staff, is they felt that it was very relevant and helpful. They felt like the examples that were brought, the trainer that we worked with worked very closely with us, with our administration, to understand the school, to understand the environment, to understand who was going to be there, so that to make sure that the examples brought would be relevant to the group. And it sounds like they were, based on the feedback from the faculty and staff. The experience, people felt good about it. People liked the presenter. And I think the feedback in their responses was that it was relevant, that they could really see how to connect what they were hearing with the experience and the environment that we're in. With the administration, it was also clear to me that the planning of this was very thoughtful and intentional, and the administrative component was designed specifically for administrators. And I think that because we're such a collaborative environment, and we don't sort of function within a hierarchy, a conversation very often, I think it was important for my administrators to really see themselves as supervisors, which isn't a word we often throw around. And I think having a sort of separate training where the focus was us as we supervise people, and also how we relate with each other, really helped set a nice tone. So I think I would say for us, the key components of this were, it felt very relevant because our trainer really worked directly with us to understand our culture and plan for within our culture. And I also think that the experience was well designed. And I think for us, it was a very nice way to start the school year, to do it before the school year started. It didn't feel like we were being trained in some like methodology. It felt like it didn't feel sort of cold or it felt collaborative. It felt relevant. It felt like it really helped to impact the culture and the community that we're trying to build. And so for us, doing it as we were starting the school year was something that was very relevant and helpful.
Thanks, Amanda. I should say that Laura also is going to give, she'll talk a little bit more about what the components of the training actually are. So we may, by the end of it, we'll have both the experiences and the specifics. Let me ask Ben about anything he'd like to share about the work he did with Laura.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben, and I'm the head of school at Schechter Manhattan. So a lot of what I have to say echoes what Amanda just shared. I'll start with that, the reasons we did this, I think for me, started as an expression of our school's values, that we try to teach our students that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and by virtue of their humanity and their holiness, they deserve to be treated with caring and with respect. And we wanted to make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable to those standards in all of our interactions in the school, And over a year ago now, in the fall of 2017, when the media was filled with pretty terrible reports of the ways people were being mistreated in workplaces, especially women, I felt that at that time, this was a moment we really need to think about this carefully. And so we had already begun looking at our anti-harassment policies internally. We reviewed that we had them. We reviewed them again with our legal counsel. And then as we were in process of thinking about how we were going to sort of approach talking to our faculty and staff about it in a deeper way, we had this opportunity to participate in this project. And I went with the principal of my school and our board chair to this amazing training with Fran Zeppler last spring. And she really, talked to us about this point in particular, which is there's this like legal bar of avoiding breaking the law. And then there's what is your policy and your institution going to look like that meets your values and your aspirations of safety and respect for everyone in your community. And so after that, we actually went again back to our policy with a new set of questions and a new set of lenses about, do the things we have on the books, do our policies actually set a set of expectations about care and respect within our school community, between our professionals and everybody here, that's not only to the legal requirements, but also to our requirements of menschlichkeit. And that was a good exercise. I'm pleased to say that we mostly felt we did. We made a few tweaks and changes around the edges of the policy, but it was a good exercise. Another thing that Fran had encouraged us to do back in the spring was to ask our employees this set of questions to give ourselves feedback about how we're doing. And I don't know if Laura's going to talk about them, but I'll just say them quickly. Do I feel respected when I am working for or with this organization? Do my contributions matter? And does this organization value me? And so I actually added those questions to our annual survey last June that we give to all of our faculty and staff. And it was really meaningful data for us that, on all three areas, we were pleased to find that over 90% of our respondents gave us yes to those questions. But those were questions we didn't know how to ask before Mann's guidance. And then, just like Amanda described, we did the same thing in our school this past August. In the last week of August, during our teacher week, we had trainings for our supervisors and leaders, which is to say, I guess, parallel to what Amanda called the administration, myself, other people on the administration of the school who supervise employees with the power of hiring and firing. But we also included, actually at Laura's suggestion, other people in the school community who are perceived as leaders, members of our educational leadership team, members of our senior staff, our director of maintenance, our lead office and support staff, other people in the school community turn to for guidance and who help set the tone. And so that group met and was trained once. And then there was a separate training, and just like Amanda articulated, I wasn't at the separate training for the rest of the faculty and staff. And we did just complete, actually this week, a session with our trustees and also the leaders of our Parents Association, where they were presented with sort of an overview of what the faculty and staff had received in training and some scenarios for them to think about in their role in setting the culture of the school. In terms of how people have been responding, I think the supervisors and leaders, their responses were very, very positive. The staff was mostly positive. There was some mixed feedback around they would have liked to have a little bit more opportunity to practice some of the things that were brought up in the session. And I'm thinking about where we can create more opportunities for for them to do that. Some challenges we faced. I mean, this is a time commitment. So carving out, the 3 hours for our supervisors and leaders in that very busy time of year in late August, carving out additional time during our teacher week for all of our faculty and staff who are super busy getting ready for the school year. That was hard to do. It was worthwhile, but a challenge. And then I think for me, thinking about making sure that the work we've done on reviewing our policies and having those trainings don't end up being one-off moments of conversation, but rather that we're working to make sure that the values we espouse are actualized in the school every day through our leadership, through our consideration, and I'm challenged, as the school leader, to make sure that we've got our eyes on that.
Thank you, Ben. Especially around some ideas for work for the future. That's really interesting. I took notes on that. Let me pass it over to Laura, who's one of our certified safe, respectful Jewish workplace trainers. She was the person who worked with Ben at Schechter. She's trained other organizations in New York as well, and she's challenged in the time we have to speak both to her experience, perhaps from her side, working with the school, and also she's going to give us an overview of what the training actually is. If I didn't mention it, Laura is a New York City classroom teacher as well, so she knows the insides of schools as well as any of us, and certainly brings a lot from that perspective. So, Laura, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the webinar. And it was a great pleasure to get to work at Schechter. And one of the wonderful things was, as Ben was saying, of taking this as a sign of our values, and how to not just have this be, oh, we have to, have training in how to report this kind of violation, or we have to have training in fire drills, and we have to have training in food safety, and we have to have all of these trainings, but that it's not just because we're interested in meeting some legal standard, but that as Jews, how does this reflect our values? And so I really appreciated that, and that sometimes there are 3 trainings that have been mentioned, but just to reiterate that there are sort of 3 separate modules or trainings that we have. One focused on non-supervisory staff, and sometimes that is a little hazy, who's a supervisor and who's not, but we discussed that and what would be beneficial about who should go to which one, and a module for supervisors and a module particularly for the board. And sometimes the board is an important ally if it's been difficult at your organization to get policy, that the board can be the place where they can say, you need this, you have to have this policy. That wasn't the case at Schechter. They had, because of their involvement and Ben's interest in pushing to work with Fran, they had a great policy already in place when we stepped in. So that makes it one kind of training versus and it's an equally valuable but different kind of training if it's more an exploratory sense of what everybody getting on the same page, what are the terms, what are our interests, and I think it can be valuable in either way. And I'm just going to show a few slides that kind of highlight, that are pieces of the trainings that sort of highlight the differences, particularly between the board, or the supervisory and the employee respectful workplace training. And most of these are slides that have been made by Fran Suppler, who designed the what used to be called harassment prevention training, or even worse, harassment training. And now she has come up with this safe, respectful workplace training, which in and of itself highlights where she finds the focus should be. And she has designed this training modules for the EEOC. And Martin was fortunate enough to wrangle her into designing this specifically for the Jewish community. So I'm going to share my screen and share that PowerPoint with you, if this cooperates with me. So hopefully you are all now looking at a slide that says respect in the workplace. And that is what we call the program that's specifically aimed at employees. And the things that it highlights in that from the very beginning is that this is different than harassment prevention training, and that there's a focus on why and how we want to build respect. And Fran has done a lot of research, and it's very evidence-based, especially for people in schools. I know that's even more important, that there's a culture of evidence-based interventions. And so it's not just, it's coming at it from a couple of different angles, both these are our values, but also here's hard facts about why we have to set our workplace up in this way. And it also has a specific section where it looks at what supports a culture of respect and what derails it. What are the specific things that derails it? And also going through how can you respond to those derailers. And as Ben was mentioning, that one of the things that the staff felt that they wanted more time for was specifically practice of how would we respond to these things and taking them in, making it their own. And as a result of feedback that we got, not just from Schechter, but from other places as well, we have expanded the amount of time that we have for each of the trainings, and in particular to be able to include more case studies, more partner work, more times where you're working in triads and there's a case study and one person's role playing one side and one person's role playing another side, and then you have a coach who's watching and can help when people get stuck, but also can provide feedback about like, oh, this was really great, and oh, I wish that you had done this, or what if we retried it this way and see what happens. And then in both trainings, both for employees and supervisors, there's also a section on how to report and respond to issues, both within your organization, at the federal level, at the city level, at the state level, of employment issues. And then also just touching upon the fact that some of these things are actually criminal issues, and that one can always go to our law enforcement for those issues. And these are things that are not only would we want everyone to understand, but they're also required by the new New York laws about what trainings have to entail. And for employees, we're focusing also on how they can, as bystanders, sometimes they may not have the control over how to make a situation stop, or how to control who gets to be employed in a place, or who their workmate is, or who they share a classroom or an office space with. But what can they do as bystanders and then upstanders? How can they actually, and how pivotal they are. Not only how can they, but also research and evidence, again, of how pivotal employees are in creating a culture. And that it's not just on the shoulders of the administrators, but that everyone has the role, and everyone has the ability to affect their culture of their workplace. And then also from an employee perspective, how to give and receive feedback, whether it's to a colleague or to and from a supervisor. And because part of creating the kind of culture that we want relies on feedback circles, and if people are giving it well and receiving it well, it encourages, there's definitely a feedback loop of making that a more common thing. And then very quickly for the employers, we call it leading for a safe and respectful workplace. And you'll notice that the first three things here are exactly the same as the employee training. How and why we build respect, what supports or derails it, how to respond and report issues, and then how to give and receive feedback is the same topic, but it is from a perspective of now you may be the supervisor of that person. And there are not only different issues of leadership, but also there's some different issues around liability for the entity, be it a school or a business or nonprofit organization. And then how to coach employees. That this is a role that, although employees can take it on as a colleague, it's very different if it's your supervisor, and how you can set up expectations and common language and common approaches to these things so that everyone really is on the same page, and that you're approaching it from a not a punitive way, but I want to help you support what we've all agreed we want. And we're all committed to this work. And in a school, it's very clear that you're educating people. And so I think Ben mentioned the 3 questions that tend to give a flavor for how well an organization is doing at creating a culture of respect. And the one of, do I feel that my work matters? Schools, in a way, have that's like almost like a freebie in the bingo card and the square in the middle, because you already are doing such important work. And so there's the extra motivation of that we all want this to go well. And so how can we do that as leaders, and helping our staff and create this vision that we all have, that we all hold together. One thing that's very important, and Ben alluded to it already, and that there's a continuum starting on the left, the green box of respectful behavior, and then things that are disrespectful or rude, but are not actionable. And abusive behavior, which sometimes may not be actionable either. If you just have someone that's yelling at everyone all the time and makes meetings difficult, or then sliding into harassing behavior and even assaultive behavior. And oftentimes organizations, when they've looked at how to train staff, they've looked at the last boxes, maybe starting in the purple box in the middle of where does our liability start. And Fran is really very clear, and as are we, that if you're at the point where you're asking, is this illegal, that it's too late, that there's already a culture within the organization that is going to be detrimental to you achieving your vision and treating people with respect. And so looking at, instead starting at how do we build the base of this arrow, and with respectful behavior. And sometimes I take this sheet and turn it so that the arrow is pointing downwards. So it's a very slippery slope that once you step into disrespectful behavior, that it very quickly slides into things that are going to end up destroying the ability of your organization to achieve its vision, as well as the ability of the organization to provide a safe and respectful workplace. And I already touched upon that case discussions are a major portion of, and we've allotted more time now so that they can have an even larger role. And in particular, I just want to touch on that in order to meet New York requirements for organizations to provide training to their employees, we're not only touching upon what are the protected classes on the federal basis, and we don't focus on it, but we just want to know people that it is covered, that there are all these additional things that are protected in New York State, and that there are additional things that are protected in New York City. And so we do touch upon those things just so people have a sense of, and we give examples, and people will go home with a handout of examples of types of behavior that might be disrespectful, that might, going down that continuum. What does it look like specifically? And with a special eye to New York State. And then, as I mentioned, we would like to be able to, there's always been a space in Fran's trainings for reviewing your policy. What is it that you expect from employees, and how is it that people should go about assistance or being able to report an issue? And this is now required by New York State So we would sit with you and look at your policy and exactly where is this policy available? Is it online in a manual? Is it in something that you give people at the beginning? Is it something you review before every staff meeting? Where is it? How do they report something? What are the expectations that everyone is being held to? And then this is just the backdrop in which already this has been alluded to by both the previous speakers, that this is a national, not just in Jewish organizations, but this is a national issue and a very pressing one. And it becomes even more pressing in Jewish communal organizations because so much of the workforce is comprised of women. And as I have had 2 children in Jewish day schools, I haven't seen that there's a different makeup in Jewish day schools versus public schools, that there is still a large number of women comprising that workforce, and that there's a different in perspective. And it's not just that only women are harassed or only, and only men are the harassers, but no matter who is being harassed, that there's a blind spot of how we see that what people are reporting is the reality of 60% of US women saying they've been sexually harassed versus, and it's not that this statistic is just men, but sometimes even women will discount. I know it was for me very surprising when the Me Too movement exploded and there was the whole Facebook people saying Me Too, that I was sort of stunned that how many of people I knew that we'd never discussed it had experienced this in their lives. And there is a organization website, bikavod.org, that has more details about our programs and how to get in touch with. Obviously, you have a direct connection with Martin, but if you'd like to see some of the other trainers and their backgrounds and places that we've worked and what our approach is like, and then just to end with the intention of holding other people's dignities as preciously as we hold our own, which I think Ben alluded to so nicely, that this is about our morals and what it is that we want to achieve in our organizations, in creating in our worlds. And now we'll try to unshare my screen so that we can take questions and let other people chime in.
Thanks, Laura. We're a small group. I think we could do this informally. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, really about anything. There are no attorneys here, so we can't do much in the way of legal advice, but there's certainly a wealth of pedagogical and educational administrative expertise. So really any aspect of this that you've heard that you want to hear more about, please ask. And if there are things we don't know the answer to, we will follow up and get you the answer. But everyone can unmute themselves and feel free to let us know what's on your mind.
And I'll just add, if people are unfamiliar with Zoom, and if you're in a situation where you can't speak your question or don't feel like it, that you can hover your cursor over the bottom usually, and there will be a little chat box, and it's possible to also type in questions if you like.
I don't know if people have questions about the law itself and about deadlines. I sent some material out about that. I guess the law is written that came into effect in October says that certainly for the training component, it's supposed to be delivered annually, and every entity is supposed to have it done by next October. We're certainly looking at next August as a time when we'll be busy working with schools. I'm not really sure what, if any, enforcement mechanism there's going to be, but obviously I would imagine all institutions want don't want to find out what sort of enforcement there actually is, and wanting to be proactive about it. It says Lisa raised her hand. Lisa, please just tell us what's on your mind.
Hi, Lisa Walsh from Schechter, Long Island. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we just implemented an online training for all of our staff, which was supposed to be up to date with the newest laws that were just changed. I'm gathering from this conversation, this webinar, that I probably should be looking for an additional training for my admin and my supervisors, because everyone equally, with the exception of my board of trustees, that did not do a training, did the same training, the employees and administrators alike. Would that be a suggestion to look for an additional training for my supervisors?
I could say a word about that. The laws written presents a kind of a minimum standard for everyone to meet, and it doesn't distinguish between these different roles. The reason why we have separate trainings for supervisors, non-supervisor employee, and boards is because they have very different perspectives, very different needs. And the particular reason is that, Laura talked about evidence-based is, drawing on experience in the private sector and other places, that the place where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, is with these supervisory interactions. And when we talk about supervisors, we mean it very broadly. It doesn't have to be in the classic sort of corporate sense. It could be really anyone who's overseeing anyone. They could be overseeing volunteers. They could be overseeing parent representatives. We define that really broadly, but the research shows that if you can impact those people, help them understand the dynamics, help them understand simple best practices that foster trust in the workplace, you get the biggest sort of bang for your buck, which is why the training we do with supervisors is the longest one. Can take 3 or 4 hours, depending on how the extent to which it gets rolling. The training for non-supervisory and volunteers might be 2 hours, 2 hours plus. And the work with the board, which we don't even call a training, it's really more of a facilitated conversation, might last for an hour. It's hard to get access to the board. Sometimes this gets tacked on to a board meeting. It's difficult to convene them just for this purpose. And that's really a discussion about culture and values. It's really coming from the place of, why were we even here talking about this? Why isn't this something that the junior associate in the HR department takes care of? Why is this even a board issue? And the conversation starts from there, really. And in particular, in Jewish communal organizations, it doesn't take that much work to convince them that there needs to be an alignment between culture and values. There are all the practical reasons. You want to reduce turnover. You obviously want to avoid any kind of liability or anything like that. But there are lots of other reasons that organizations simply want to be able to put their best foot forward and to have everyone feel that they're working in a place that values them, that they're working in a place that cares about them, that if God forbid there be some situation, some adverse situation, that the organization has their back, so to speak. So, there are certainly, this is not the only way, obviously, to meet the requirement. There are many ways, and in fact, the one of the New York State agencies even has a kind of a thing online that you can just sort of download and go through.
We did something sort of similar to that.
So it really goes to sort of what you want your organization to do and to be. I mean, there'll certainly be.
Can I chime in?
Please. Sorry.
I just want to add that in addition to Martin's point about supervisors in a broad sense being a high risk space for potential negative workplace interactions because of those power differentials, and therefore I agree that training those folks is important. From the perspectives of supporting those folks, they're also the ones who are most likely to take a complaint. And my team, I don't think before we did this really had a good sense of, of having the opportunity to think through what should they do if a complaint comes their way, and how would they respond in a way that was both legally appropriate and ethically appropriate. And so I thought that from that perspective, it was really, really valuable that we took the time separate from the faculty and staff to be able to give space for the supervisory leadership folks to think that through. And the second thing is for the faculty and staff to have a separate training where we, the people who are in a position of authority, aren't in the room, hopefully created safety for them to be honest about whatever dialogue they were having around how they want to treat each other and how they would go about dealing with the situation. And also to know that, to get clarity about where they could make a complaint, and the range of options for that with the people who are their bosses not in the room. So from all those perspectives, in my view, having a separate training for people in a position of a supervisory or leadership position is really valuable. And then I'll just add, in terms of the trustee work, we just did this week. And, if you had asked me before we started this process, I'm not sure I would have identified this as a trustee issue, but now it's super clear to me that it is. On one very practical matter, the trustees are responsible for risk management for the institution, and this is a high-risk area. And so just as a matter of them having good information about their trusteeship, they should know about the steps that are being taken within an institution to make sure that the institution is protecting itself and protecting its employees. And then second to that, or parallel to that, the people around my board table, and I suspect around your board tables as well, they're there because of their values, because of the things that are important to them, and they really care, and they want to lead the school in a really positive direction. So it makes a lot of sense for them to be a part of the dialogue as well.
I agree. Thank you very much.
I would also just add one little anecdote that Fran Sepler, who I mentioned, designed this training and who's worked in this field for decades. One of the things that she's proudest of in her work in this area was testifying at Congress. And one of the things she's most proud of saying to them was, she said, if you have $100 to spend, you should spend 99 of it on training your supervisors. Just as Ben said, they're the ones who are most likely going to be the first line of hearing about, of receiving a complaint for the organization, and how that's taken. Not only does it transmit values of how important this is to the organization, whether you're going to poo-poo it or it's going to be handled in a respectful way. And it may not be that people are attempting to be disrespectful, as Ben said, they just might not have actually thought, like the head of the janitor staff or the head of the office didn't take that position because they thought that they would be handling complaints of this nature. So it's not part of maybe how they conceived of what their role was. So being able to give time to that, and give people some language and some techniques and some best practices to look at.
Yeah,
Sounds very helpful.
I'm going to definitely make the recommendation. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're wrapping up, but I certainly want to make sure we have the opportunity for anyone else to share with us their experiences or plans that they have at their institutions to meet some of these requirements or go beyond them, or other things that we should be thinking about as we try to meet the needs of schools, certainly in the New York area and beyond. Okay. Well, if there aren't other questions, let me thank everyone for coming, for taking part of their lunch hour, or who knows. Let me thank our presenters for taking time out and for the good, thoughtful work they've done on this. And we'll be following up. We'll send you a link to the recording and some other material. If you have questions or concerns or want to know more, you know where to find me. And if, as you get into this, we would be, whatever you end up doing, whatever's right for your school, however you end up meeting the requirements, we'd very much like to hear about it, to understand what schools are actually doing on the ground. So let me thank everyone for coming. Let me wish you Shabbat Shalom, and to keep in touch.
Thanks, Martin, for your leadership on this important issue in the Jewish community.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Shalom.
Thank you.